in a galaxy far, far away.
So another person attached to the Walt Disney Company, the director of the Little Mermaid animated movie, Aladdin, and Hercules, John Musker, came out against Wokistan and the political messaging in the recent films. Now, we all know there's a reason why these movies failed is obvious. They're poorly written. The cast was chosen not for its talent and not for its appropriateness, but for color and or other minority status. Okay. And when the writing is so bad that the political messaging is obvious, you have a problem. Okay. So John Musker came out at an animation conference in Spain and basically said, and he talked about a course correction. I think they need to do a course correction a bit in terms of putting the message secondary behind entertainment and compelling and engaging characters. Musker told the outlet, whatever it is, El Paz. So this is a second Disney-connected person out there saying that it's time for the wokesters to go back under the rock that came out from under. George Lucas was the first one on Friday. Now, I don't know what Musker's motivation is, but he felt unafraid to challenge the current people at Disney Animation to do better. I think I know what compelled George Lucas. George was asked by Bob Iger to vote for Bob Iger's slate of candidates in the proxy fight with Nelson Peltz over the board. And George said, okay, Bob, I'll vote for you, but I want something in return. It's a quid pro quo. That's what happens. Corporate politics really isn't that much different than congressional politics up on Capitol Hill. And there's a lot of I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine stuff going on in Congress. And this is exactly what George did. I mean, and he felt empowered for some reason to come out and say what he said about the complaints by the Molly Damons and the Alex Joneses and the Brian Youngs about, Star Wars so white male. Okay. And it's really interesting to me because I've got the video here. You will see it. George got in a lot of trouble for what he said about Disney after The Force Awakens came out. All right. He was really pissed. Now, I have a theory that I'm going to bring out for you guys about what's going on. And then, of course, he disparaged the criticism about how women in Star Wars were portrayed. And I've talked about this. I talked about this last Friday. The fact that people don't see Leia as being a woman strong enough to navigate a man's world, to have their respect, to be placed on a pedestal by them because she could deal with their shit. Okay. And, you know, if you look at the way Kathleen Kennedy talked about Star Wars and about women in Star Wars, she obviously has had a very hard time herself navigating a world in which men dominate. So instead of doing what George did, she decided to take what George did and blank it out, make the men go away, because her characters can't live in a world where they're only equal to men. Okay, the Last Jedi is a perfect example of the idea of feminine superiority. It's garbage because of it. Okay, and the reason why it's bullshit and it doesn't work is because the universe is not set up that way. And this whole thing about a matriarchy is just, look, if the patriarchy's bad, the matriarchy's bad. You understand. And when you watch Star Wars, whether it be Leia or Padme, there isn't a matriarchy. There's equality. And that's the thing. And true equality has been lost on Kathleen Kennedy, on Leslie Headland, and the rest of this garbage. Okay. That's what George is talking about. Again, Leia is the rare woman who can navigate the world of men. But let's talk further.
These are my kids. So
all those Star Wars films.
all the Star Wars films.
They were your kids.
Yeah, well, they are my. I loved them. I created them. I'm very intimately involved in them, and obviously to
And
sell
you
them
sold
off.
them.
I sold them to the white slavers that take these things and.
Okay, but having said all that and having
They
talked to you,
really didn't understand what the word graffiti meant.
They didn't. The studio executives generally are not the most sophisticated people in the world. And you will find that if you go to Hollywood. I hope you don't, because you don't want to be oppressed by people who are not as smart as you are. And I'm dumb. And obviously...
I think I broke my nose. George Lucas broke my nose.
Dennis, what's going on?
Is he going to be all right?
He's gonna be fine. Never again, Dennis. Never again.
The age of men is over. The time of the orc has come.
Get out.
And here George talks about making Star Wars and how he wanted to make it one way and it ended up going in a direction he didn't plan. That is the unconscious, I think, creative thing that men have, that, and women too, that happens when you are a genius. Okay, when you're trying to tell a story, and you consciously know what it is, and it suddenly goes into a realm you didn't really plan on. He talks about how the weather influences how chemistry between the people, the actors, the crew, how everything works together, and you end up with a product with your personality on it. Okay, so George talked about, in very indirect ways, about how stupid it is for woke messaging to be in the films. Star Wars, could be Marvel, Ghostbusters even. I think that went a little bit woke. There's that. Okay. When you think about what he said, he is not a conservative. Okay. He even got to the point where people have accused the Battle of Endor to being about Vietnam. And he's been yes and no on that. You look at the things around the current moment at that time. You know, George and other people of his age group still talk about Richard Nixon like he's hiding under their beds at night. So you look at that, I mean, but still, they were able to navigate stories that weren't affected by their beliefs in a way, all right? It didn't really get into the political realm until you got to the prequels, which was very political about, basically, I think the prequels was about big government, okay? And how it wasn't doing anybody any good on an individual basis and how corrupt it was, okay? That is a very libertarian thing to talk about. That is a very, dare I say, MAGA endorsed thing to say, all right? And somebody like me who looks at mistrusts the UN, cannot stand the World Economic Forum, thinks it's garbage. I look at that stuff and go, you know, George has a point here, okay? He may not be making the point he thought he was making. All right, sometimes a creator does something and what they want people to see out of it is not what they're seeing. And that is, in lots of ways, the genius of storytelling. Meanwhile, Kathleen Kennedy, whose personality is stamped all over the sequel trilogy and Solo, a Soy War story, and Indiana Jones of the Dial of Destiny, it's so obvious what she's doing. It's so obvious that the woke feminist garbage message that she's putting out there. All right, and when you're watching those movies, you suddenly realize the woman in charge of Lucasfilm cannot handle navigating a world dominated by men. I mean, she, was taught at the knee, sat at the knee of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and instead of learning something about storytelling and about the creative process, she did everything she could to erase the things that they did because it intimidated her. They were men, and she narcissistically felt she had to put her own brand on everything, to the point where there were times when I've absolutely thought that she wanted to erase everything George did and say that she created Star Wars. Okay, she misremembers a lot, all right? It's very interesting to me. It's not the Streisand effect, but it could be. All right, let's talk about the theory I have about her. Now, because I'm pretty sure now that there was a quid pro quo between George and Bob Iger, I have a feeling George said, I want her gone. I want influence over Star Wars again. I don't want to see her face anymore. And Bob said, okay, because he's been trying to get rid of her for a long time. And to be honest, I think Steven Spielberg has been part of that effort to get her away from Lucasfilm. After what she did to Indiana Jones, and how long they should, look, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny should have probably come out before The Force Awakens. Okay. They had already been talking about the script. I believe there was a script written for it already. And they just went from one script to another written by other people. John Kasdan even wrote a script and they were like, oh my God, get rid of it, this sucks. Because he can't write. Again, the guy makes the mistake of putting politics and woke shit instead of the story. Okay, we don't get anything that makes sense. Like Ryan Johnson, we get Canto Bight, Vice Admiral Gender Studies, and no story. No background beyond a weird subtext about Luke. Okay, and it's like, that's not how you do this. And to me, people who are activists are not serious filmmakers. And if they want to be activists, I suggest be documentarians. Go back and be documentarians, do your thing, try to get on the festival circuit, and noticed by the Oscars, because you're not narrative filmmakers. Okay. Rian Johnson, all he can do is Knives Out. That's it. That's all he can do. He is obviously not a good enough filmmaker and a big enough filmmaker to make a movie like Star Wars without shitting all over everything. And the vindictiveness behind the sequel trilogy itself, that's all Kathleen Kennedy. She never got Leia's role. She never got Padme's role. Okay. Which, Padme and Leia were as important as Luke and Han and Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay. The women were the axis on which everybody else revolved around. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. That's the thing. Padme's, rejection in some way of Anakin drove him to into the arms of Darth Vader. Okay. Leia, because of who she is and her relationship with Han Solo, drove him to get her off of Hoth. He sacrifices himself for her, and then she goes back and sacrifices for him. Okay, that's a relationship. I want to ask you guys a question in light of what Musker said about stop the messaging, stop this woke shit, and what George said last week. In light of all that, how come Kathleen Kennedy, Leslie Headland, and the rest of this refuse garbage, these garbage humans, how come they couldn't understand it? Because they're not looking for equality, they're looking for domination. And it all has everything to do with being insecure women in a man's world and believing themselves to be victims when they're not. So I've got another video coming out about Leslie Headland. I discovered some hilarious shit about her, and you guys got to hear it. This is Steph signing out. I'll see you around the galaxy.